Two identical houses, same wood, same roof angle, same windows, same orientation. Right now, one of them reads 71 degrees Fahrenheit inside, the other 84 degrees Fahrenheit. Same time, same afternoon sun, same everything. The difference between those two numbers, it's not the paint color or the insulation brand. It's buried 4 feet below the foundation. You can't see it. You can't repaint it. You can't replace it in a weekend. But it controls everything. Before we talk about what's different underground, let's be clear about what's the same. Both houses face the same direction. Both have the same window-to-wall ratio. Both were built in the same decade, with the same lumberyard order. If you drove past them today, you wouldn't stop to compare them. They look identical, and yet, one family sleeps with a single ceiling fan and wakes up comfortable. The other runs 2 window units from May through September and still doesn't quite get there. Most people in that second house have tried everything above the floor. New curtains, attic insulation, a programmable thermostat, a better AC unit. The floor, nobody looks at the floor. Here's what the cross-section reveals. House A, slab on grade. The concrete floor sits directly on compacted earth. There's no airspace between the structure and the ground. The floor is in continuous thermal contact with the soil below it. House B, ventilated crawl space. Between the floor joists and the ground, there's a chamber. Roughly 18 to 24 inches of open air space, with vents along the perimeter, designed to, quote, let the house breathe. That airspace is the whole problem. Here's what most builders don't explain when they choose a foundation type. The ground, at 4 to 6 feet of depth, holds a remarkably stable temperature year-round. In temperate climates across the United States and Canada, that temperature sits between 54 degrees Fahrenheit and 58 degrees Fahrenheit, 12 to 14 degrees Celsius, regardless of what the thermometer outside is reading. Think about that for a moment. In July, when the air outside hits 94 degrees Fahrenheit, 34 degrees Celsius, and the asphalt on your road is hot enough to burn your hand, 6 feet down, the earth is at 56 degrees Fahrenheit. It has been there, quietly, all summer, waiting. In January, when the same air outside reads 14 degrees Fahrenheit minus 10 degrees Celsius, and the pipes in the crawl space are threatening to freeze. 6 feet down, the earth is still at 54 degrees Fahrenheit, 12 degrees Celsius. The ground is a battery, a thermal battery that never charges too cold. It just holds. The slab on grade house is connected to that battery, continuously. Every square inch of floor, every hour of every day, is in thermal dialogue with a mass that stays at 55 degrees Fahrenheit. In summer, that dialogue pulls heat down and out of the structure. In winter, that same mass acts as a baseline buffer, reducing the rate at which the house loses heat to the air. The crawl space house severed that connection. Deliberately. With the best of intentions. Now let's follow what happens to House B on a warm afternoon in late June. It's 3 p.m. The outside air is 88 degrees Fahrenheit, 31 degrees Celsius. The sun has been on the west wall for 2 hours. The attic is approaching 130 degrees Fahrenheit, 54 degrees Celsius. Under the floor joists of House B, inside that ventilated crawl space, the air temperature is 82 degrees Fahrenheit, 28 degrees Fahrenheit, 28 degrees Celsius. Because the vents are open, because what those vents are designed to do is exactly what they're doing. Pulling in outside air. Warm, humid, outside air. That air is now below the floor of every room in the house. The subfloor is absorbing heat from below. The floor joists are conducting it upward. The floors that feel warm in summer aren't warm because of the sun. They're warm because you've built a convection oven underneath your living room. The insulation between the joists, it helps. But it's fighting a source of heat that moves constantly, renews itself every time the vent draws in fresh afternoon air, and covers the entire footprint of the house. There's no attic fan that fixes this, because the heat isn't coming from the top. It's coming from the bottom. House A is having a different afternoon. At 3 p.m., the concrete slab is absorbing radiant heat from the rooms above. But the concrete slab is also in contact with the earth below it, which is at 56 degrees Fahrenheit. The slab is being pulled from both sides. It absorbs some heat from the living space, and it surrenders some of that heat, slowly, into the earth below. The floor stays cooler than the air, not dramatically, but enough. 5, 7, sometimes 9 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than the room air at peak heat hours. That temperature differential creates a subtle but continuous effect. The lower 2 feet of every room in House A behaves like a slow, passive cooling system. No moving parts. No energy draw. Just physics. The concrete is the intermediary. The earth is the engine. Now follow both houses into winter. This is where the comparison gets interesting, because the advantage doesn't simply flip, it compounds. House B in January. The crawlspace vents are open. Outside temperature at 6 degrees a.m. The air under the floor joists. 26 degrees Fahrenheit, the floor above the crawlspace, cold enough that rugs are not optional. Cold enough that the baseboard heaters on the first floor run almost continuously. The insulation in the joists is rated at R19. It's working. But it's working against a continuous source of cold air that covers the entire floor. Every BTU the heating system produces, some fraction goes straight down. House A in January. The slab temperature at 6:00 a.m. 54 degrees Fahrenheit, 12 degrees Celsius. Still, not warm, but not cold either. The heating system has to overcome the difference between 54 degrees Fahrenheit and the target interior temperature, not the difference between 22 degrees Fahrenheit outside air and the target interior. The ground is not heating the house. But it is, dramatically reducing how hard the house has to work to stay heated. In an average heating season across the northern United States, a well-built slab on grade house on good soil will use noticeably less energy for space heating than a comparable house on a ventilated crawl space. The ground buffer is real. It's not theoretical. It shows up on the bill. On the bill. Before you go looking at house listings or planning a major retrofit, there's one more thing to understand. The slab on grade story is not all advantages. It's a trade, and the trade matters depending on where you live. In regions with expansive clay soils, a slab can crack as the soil moves seasonally. In areas with high radon concentrations, a slab without a vapor barrier and a depressurization system can pull radon gas directly into the living space. In flood zones, a slab on grade puts your entire floor system at risk in ways a crawl space doesn't. The slab is not the answer everywhere. It's the answer for specific climates and specific soil types. What the slab represents is a principle, not a prescription. The principle is this: thermal connection to the earth is a resource. Disconnecting from it has consequences. Now, if you have a crawl space, this does not mean you've lost. It means the ventilated crawl space is probably the worst version of what you could have. There is a middle position. It's called encapsulation, and it changes the physics of the crawl space without requiring you to pour concrete. Here's what encapsulation does. You close the perimeter vents. Seal them. The crawlspace stops being a chamber that exchanges air with the outside. It becomes a conditioned space, a buffer zone. You install a thick vapor barrier across the entire soil floor. We're talking 20 mil reinforced polyethylene, sealed at the seams, run up the foundation walls. You may add a small dehumidifier or tie the crawlspace into the HVAC return air system with a small duct to maintain slight positive pressure and reduce humidity. What happens now? The crawlspace temperature begins to track the interior of the house instead of the outside air. In summer, it stays in the low to mid 70s degrees Fahrenheit rather than the high 80s. In winter, it stays near the interior temperature rather than approaching outdoor lows. The floor joists are no longer buffered against a hostile environment. They're buffered against a mild one. The thermal improvement is not as dramatic as a slab on grade, but the cost is achievable. A professionally encapsulated crawlspace on a 1,200 square foot footprint runs between $1,500 in most U.S. markets. A crawlspace that's in rough shape, with existing mold, standing moisture, deteriorating vapor barrier from decades ago, may run higher before remediation. The return typically shows up in 18 to 30 months in reduced energy costs. And the comfort improvement shows up the first winter you don't wear socks in your own kitchen. There's a detail here that most guides get wrong. The instinct, when you hear close the crawlspace vents, is to worry about moisture. Old building code logic said you need cross ventilation under the house to prevent wood rot and mold. Some inspectors still say this. That logic was based on climates and construction methods that predate modern vapor barriers. In a humid summer climate, opening crawlspace vents doesn't dry the crawlspace. It introduces warm, humid outside air into a cool space. The air hits the cooler surfaces of the joists and condenses. That condensation is where mold grows. That condensation is where wood rots. A counterintuitive truth. An open, ventilated crawlspace in a humid climate is wetter than a sealed, encapsulated one. The vapor barrier cuts the primary moisture source, ground evaporation, and the sealed envelope eliminates the condensation cycle. The house was trying to breathe. Someone opened the wrong window. Let's build the diagnostic for your house. 2 minutes. That's all you need. Go to the lowest floor of your home. Find a corner near an exterior wall. Get down and touch the floor with the back of your hand. Hold it there for 15 seconds. If the floor feels noticeably cool to the touch, cooler than the air in the room, you likely have some form of soil contact or encapsulated crawlspace working for you. If the floor feels neutral or warmer than you'd expect, you have a crawlspace that's exchanging air with the outside. In summer, that air is hot. In winter, it's cold. Now go outside. Look around the foundation perimeter. Are there rectangular vents, typically 4 to 8 inches high, screened or louvered, spaced every 6 to 8 feet along the foundation wall? If yes, you have a ventilated crawlspace. Look at the vent screens. Are they open year-round? Are they damaged? Can you feel air moving through them? That's where your floor temperature comes from. Here's a note on Pioneer root cellars, because this isn't a new problem. Before mechanical cooling, before even insulation as we know it, settlers across the American Midwest understood something that modern building practice spent 50 years forgetting. The earth is temperate. At depth, it doesn't freeze hard in winter or bake in summer. It holds. A root cellar dug 4 to 6 feet into the ground kept vegetables at 40 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit 4 to 13 degrees Celsius across every season. Not because of any system, not because of any material, but because of contact. The Earth itself was the storage medium. Those settlers weren't behind. They were ahead of a problem that would only appear when builders started lifting structures off the ground entirely, sealing them from below with nothing but a layer of joists and some insulation, and wondering why the floor was cold. The earth under your house remembers what it's for. The question is whether your foundation allows that relationship to exist. Before you add a second zone to your HVAC, before you re-insulate the attic again, go downstairs. Go outside to the foundation perimeter. Look at those vents. Because if the problem is underground, nothing you do above the floor will fix it. You will keep treating symptoms. The diagnosis will never change. 3 scenarios, and where each one points. If you have slab on grade and the floor still runs warm, the problem is above, walls, roof, or infiltration. The foundation isn't the weak point. Look up. If you have ventilated crawl space and you've been fighting the floor temperature for years, encapsulation is the highest return single intervention available to you. Before another HVAC quote, before another layer of blown-in insulation, price out encapsulation. It is almost always the right first move. If you have a crawl space that was encapsulated years ago, but is performing poorly, check the vapor barrier. Seam failures and tears are common after a decade. Check the dehumidifier, if one was installed. A failed dehumidifier in an encapsulated crawl space can lead to worse moisture conditions than an open one. The order matters. The fix has a sequence. The earth under your house is the cheapest thermal system you'll never have to install. It doesn't run on electricity. It doesn't have a filter to change. It doesn't fail in an ice storm. It doesn't need a warranty. It just holds at 55 degrees Fahrenheit every season, year after year. All it asks is that you stay connected to it. Most houses cut that connection sometime in the mid-20th century and called it progress. Before you add force, read the flow. The fix was always there. You just couldn't see it.